Hello. In this video, I will be demonstrating a very powerful tool for developing in Ruby called pry. Once we have implemented pry, we will use it to explore the assertion library rspec and also how we can use cucumber hooks to help organize our code. Starting with pry. Pry is a debugging tool for Ruby. It makes available the pry breakpoint, which we will use to debug and explore our own code. To understand what pry is, first, let's take a look at IRB. IRB stands for Interactive Ruby. In the command prompt or terminal, type IRB. This opens up a REPL session of IRB. In this session, we can test Ruby expressions and see what the output will be. So this way you can see I'm simply just saving some variables, adding them, adding and dividing them, what have you. IRB is very useful for testing out Ruby code. To exit both IRB and pry, you simply type exit. When a Ruby program runs with a binding.pry breakpoint in it, the script will run up to that point, and then we'll open an IRB session, the same as we were just using. Once there, all defined objects and variables will be available to experiment with. To begin implementing pry, first we have to put it in our gem file. And once there, you run bundle install. And we can see here, we now have pry installed. Once pry is installed, we have available for us this breakpoint. It is also important that you require pry. If you have a larger project and you have some infrastructure set up for it, these things you don't have to manually require, but it is a step we have to take eventually. For now, though, we're just going to manually require pry. We'll have to do the same with most other libraries we put in here. With that being done, binding.pry is now available to us. When we run this test, it will stop here, and we can also examine this instance variable we saved in the previous step. Let's go ahead and do that. Awesome. So we are here, and we can even see the Qux instance variable. If we had in our test script some classes somewhere, we could even instance those classes inside of here, run their methods, and explore how it interacts inside this part of code. It's very easy to do this, and you can actually copy and paste code out of here, put it into your script, be fairly confident it's going to work, just as it did when you're experimenting inside the REPL session. Using pry can greatly decrease dev time. In my opinion, it's a considerable quality of life tool that makes working in Ruby a joy to code in. From here on out, you're going to be seeing me use it quite often. Now that we have pry installed, let's use it to explore some other tools. We're going to take a look at what the assertion library we'll be using, known as rspec. rspec is a very popular assertion library for Ruby. It is mostly used for unit testing Rails applications. It comes preloaded with many natural language matchers, as well as the ability to define custom matchers and custom behavior. Our first step, as with any of these, is to add it to our gem file, and then we will run bundle install. rspec, we save, bundle install. Now we can see we had a lot more dependencies come in with this. We now have the ability to run rspec's assertions. A common pattern to do so is like this. Something like this. Inside here, you're going to have some type of Ruby expression. And you can test, this code will take this Ruby expression and test that it is equal to the expected result. Pretty easy, right? So using this, we can do something like this and test that this instance variable is equal to the string that we expect. We'll comment both these out for now. Cool. So here's a pretty basic rspec expectation. The matches it gives you are things like to equal. You could also write things like to not. To include is also another one. And in general, almost every basic Ruby method that comes with a question mark to it, such as include, equal, etc., has an equivalent in rspec that does essentially the same thing, and you just write it without the question mark. And so this will make sure that this instance variable equals this string. Let's go and see if this passes. We're running a test, and it did. Let's see what it returns when it errors. I'm going to intentionally take this string and now we'll run it again, knowing it's going to fail. As we can see, rspec's default error is to return the expected and actual return. For many cases, the default return is fine, but sometimes if a test fails, you want to surface more information that will be useful to both you, the tester, and anyone else who's looking at it, primarily devs or business stakeholders, whoever else. rspec supports returning custom failure string, but only with rspec's to-be method. To-be works kind of like equals. The only difference is it actually compares objects, meaning it will check the actual object ID and not just a quality. So this string right here, which passed just fine using equal, will not pass if we use to-be because they're not the same object. They are both two different strings. In this way, it seems like we wouldn't be able to put a custom matcher for this using the to-be, but we actually can. If you remember, this part in here is simply evaluating a Ruby expression. So what we could say, expect at 2cukes.equal using the plain one, and in here we can give it the string. Oops. What this is going to do, at cukes.equal will return true if it is equal and false if it's not. We're simply going to type that out in our assertion. So in this case, we are evaluating this expression and expecting it to be true. And in this way, we can add a custom matcher if we want. This is the way that it's normally typed, as Ruby normally doesn't care too much about parentheses unless you get into big nested things. However, when using a custom matcher, you do have to put it in parentheses. Why exactly, I'm not sure. There's likely some method going on, in which case Ruby needs to have the parentheses to tell where the method delimiters are and such. So, let's see if this test passes. And it did. Let's go ahead and intentionally make this wrong. Okay. Well, we can see this is not a very good error here. Expected true got false. It's not really passing back anything like that. rspec makes it very easy to define a custom string. You simply go comma after your assertion, and then give it the string you want. The string supports interpolated values in Ruby. What that means, I'll show you in a second. So here we will type our custom message. We're going to say we'll go ahead and check against the original instance variable in this case. And here is some Ruby syntax for interpolating variables. It is the pound or hashtag sign, however you want to think about it, followed by curly braces. Once you have that, you can run actual Ruby code inside of it. Or if you want, just interpolate variables as we are in here. So in this case, we'll have the string coming back error expected this. Got. I'm sorry, I actually have that backwards. What we want to put is something in here like the string we were searching on, which is cukes. And we'll interpolate the cukes value in here. Okay, so now we can run this. It'll fail. It'll tell us a little bit, give us a little more information on what it was. Cool. So we can see in here, expected cukes, got cukes are running wild. In these errors, I also like to add a little bit of styling just to make it more readable. So I'm going to put a line break here. Actually, a double line break. And I'm going to indent this. And I'll do the same here. Let's go ahead and run it again. So it kind of messed it up just a little bit. Yeah. So it looks a little weird because we just have error up here, but you can see what it's doing. Got expected cukes, got cukes running wild. Just makes these errors more readable. In this case, it's not such a big deal, but it can be when you're trying to return data or big responses. You want to space those out as you can. So I just like using line breaks and double spacing to try to make it a little more readable when it comes back. Using the above pattern does require some skill in creating the Ruby expression that will evaluate true or false. So some practice with the Ruby evaluation blocks is highly recommended before implementing this pattern. That being said, a large project could exist without ever using custom matchers and still be an effective test suite. I simply like to use these, so they give some value added and a little bit easier on the dev's eyes when they're looking at our scenarios. So I'm going to go ahead and comment this out for now. Another useful way you can use pry is to actually evaluate some of these. I'm going to say at cukes. I'm going to for now I'm going to also save this instance variable. We'll go ahead and use that later to evaluate some things. I'm going to run this test again. And I had a syntax error. I need to put an equal sign there. Okay, so now we're in here. Again, using pry, you can go ahead and test actual assertion code as well. And you see it evaluates the true. So in this way, if you're, for instance, working on a large assertion or perhaps some large return failure string, it could be useful to test the string out and make sure your values are interpolating correctly before actually making sure that it returns right. Or if you have a complicated series of steps, you can execute a few of them manual in here and see if any of the difference changes your expectation or any other circumstances that you might find yourself in. The point is that it is very easy to test your code and your expectations using a combination of pry and everything else you get with Ruby. Let's exit out of this. Now let's take a look at hooks. Cucumber hooks are essentially blocks of code that run before, after, or around step code. Where the hook is run is based on where the hook tag is placed in the feature file. Hooks can be used to set up, tear down test data, or to instance classes and make them available to your test code as an instance variable. For now, we'll just define a hook with some values, and we'll go ahead and access them once we're inside our tests. Hooks have to be defined underneath the support folder that is underneath the features folder. So underneath here, we'll go ahead and make a support. And in here, we'll do a hooks file, hooks.rb. Here we'll say before, and we'll just call it sample hook. And this also needs to be in a string. So single quotes. What we'll set in here is a simple instance variable. Oops. And we'll go ahead and put just the word cukes in here. Okay. So we have our sample hook annotation, if you want to think of it that way. We'll go ahead and put this inside of our feature file. We want this to run, to be available on all the tests, so we're just going to put it at the top. If you wanted this hook to only be available in a specific scenario, you simply tag it right here above the scenario. It'll only be available in that scenario, provided it's also not at the top. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run this now. And we should have that instance variable available to us. And there we go. Instance variable, hook variable, is returning cukes. In that demonstration, you can see inside of here, we could do what we were doing before, and instance classes, which is what I use it for mostly. Instance things like clients, things like that. And you can also use after hooks using the same block format, just simply with after. You'll put your hook string in here, and just like this. And in here, you could define things such as some cleanup code, can delete things and such like that. Hooks are very important, and a very important tool for organizing code. I definitely recommend using them whenever possible. So in this way, we have learned quite a bit about some basic tools of Ruby. And in future videos, we'll begin using all these tools together to make out some actual tests.